Before I start my session, I want to give a little bit of introduction about myself. I am an adventure enthusiast. So if you see that picture of mine, that's skydiving 15,000 feet, 60-second free fall at 200 kilometers per hour. And the second one is bungee jumping from the world's highest commercial bridge, which is in South Africa. If you're passionate about finance and business change and the continuous thing that we talked about today, risk, regulatory compliance, and tech disruption, how different it is being an adventure enthusiast. Before I get there, this is a safe harbor statement from Oracle. What it means is that you can fully trust me with what I'm telling you, but you can't hold me accountable contractually for what I tell you. Right? So I'm going to talk to you about three things. One is the value shift, what is driven by digitization. Second, how do you create tomorrow today, or tomorrow's finance function today? And third, I'm sure you don't want me to come and preach you here, but show me what a new CFO look like in a new role. So these are the three things that I'm going to cover. Imagine all of you are in the board of carbon, right? What would the puzzle look like? Right? No different than what you have today, right? But imagine the intensity, the magnitude, and the business change, which is exponential. And let's say you are appointed as the CFO of carbon. What is the role of the CFO going to look like, right? Let's take an example of a value lens of customer experience, which is nothing but bundling of products, sales mix, pricing and licensing, delivery models, right? How does finance move to the forefront of customer strategy, right? These are things that they do today as the CFO, which is as a business case advisor, as an operational enabler, as a revenue recognition enabler, as a tax advisor. The second example that I want to use is about innovation capacity, right? The question here is that what is finance role in facilitating innovation? And this is what I want to point to you about the value shift, which is basically the role of the CFO as an advisor focusing on financial impacts and control, as well as an enabler to work together with the CEO, the CFO, the CDO to facilitate, one, monetization of today's evolving pricing and delivery models, and second is about tracking and optimizing those return on validated innovations. Now, obviously we talked a lot about change and how it is accelerating at a very exponential pace. The objective here is that how can we create tomorrow's finance today? So I would like to introduce you to the concept of augmented CFO. Augmenting is about adding greater value and size by three dimensions. Number one, greater efficiency, which is cross-functional and relentless automation of transaction and processes. Second is about better information. You all have this FP&A organization, which is financial planning and analysis. How can you make this as the powerhouse of innovation, the potential to unleash innovative strategy? And third is around influence. And I think the previous session talked about how do we exert that influence. The only way for you to exert influence is by driving outcomes. How do you do business partnering to rapid decision making? You do this by adding new skills in statistics, in data analysis, and in visualization. The first step towards augmented CFO is automation. Is how do we take that repetitive tasks, freeing up people from those tedious activities, one that drains as a value on your balance sheet, but also prone to human errors. Now here's an example, and I know that many of you have listened to RPA, right? But what is RPA, robotic process automation, in simple terms? It is put productivity on repeat. How do you put productivity on repeat? You basically get agents, like how would you put someone to work? So when you put agents, we call it bots. So how can you configure a bot to assign tasks that you can control? So that is what we would put as RPA. Second, here's an example of a retail company on how they are putting RPA and AI to test. This is how they go through today, which is manual process, which you are fully familiar to. So what they do is that they use an RPA agent, one to scan those invoices, which is using OCR, and determining those cost centers and entities, validating those with purchase orders and receipt goods. Now, obviously, this is done with checks and controls and those rules which prevent those invoices from posting to entities. So this is the first step towards augmented CFO, which is automation. The second step of an augmented CFO is visualization. And we've all talked about BI, so BI is no longer about preparation, aggregation, and analysis. It's about embedded analytics. Someone told me content is king, right? But in today's world, context is King Kong, right? So this is what you need in analysis, which is that contextual embedded analytics. Obviously, you don't need something which is silo Excel models, but something which has cross-functional nature, so that finance acts as a counseling agent to each of those departments that you work with. So here's an example of a utilities company, which basically came up with mechanics to get over those Excel-based silo analysis to an organizational view, which cuts across function and processes. The third thing about augmented CFO is about creating impact, and we've discussed this. Impact is about creating, is about business partnering with your functions in procurement, in supply chain, in finance, in manufacturing, in logistics, to be able to do rapid decision making. So one, by providing visibility to liquidity of the company, so that we know that how can you use this excess cash to be able to offer discounts. Second, using AI to trigger those suppliers that are most likely to accept those early payment discounts. So this is how you would go about creating impact. And finally, about shape. And I know this is a little bit of far-fetched, but there are organizations who are digitizing procurement, logistics, transaction and payments in a single distributed ledger on blockchain for payment and register records. Second, they're using IoT to not only track goods and parties, but as well as reorder items, as well as predictive maintenance. So this is an example of another company which is redefining what ERP was called yesterday to how do you orders and suppliers. How do you go about tracking those payment penalties and implication of that on insurance as well as government taxes. So to bring it all together, the three things for an augmented CFO is one, greater efficiency, better information, and more influence. So you do that with four things. We've discussed that, automate, visualize, impact, and shape. I wanted to get a poll time on maybe a show of hands. How many of you believe the relevance of RPA? Anyone relevant? Anyone think it's relevant? Show of hands. 1, 2. Many who say it's irrelevant, but show me first. How many of those? Okay, 1. The rest believe it's irrelevant? Okay, so but 48% of the CXOs will take action in the next year to automate some of these things with RPA. Now the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is how do you bring this life, this role? So I've got a little thing that I could want to show to you. So this is an example of a new vision for a controller. So this is the dashboard. So basically defines the journals and payables of. So it's not a system of information, but also system of engagements. What are the 5 critical tasks that I have? So if you look at it, it basically says that I've got journal approvals. So basically, marketing events, etc., has been spent. So I can approve from here, right? I could look at my supply recommendation, the one that we discussed earlier, where I could, look at my cash flow position to be able to offer discounts. And you might as well look at, configuring those that are recommended by the chatbot to say, can I relook at my cases? And this is from here, you're able to not only approve those suppliers for those discounts. So the other case of RPA that we talked about, so this is an example of scanned invoices. So this is where we have employed a chatbot to scan those invoices. So it tells me for the next 14 days, I've got 20 invoices pending. So I could go through, so you would call this business intelligence, but then I could even straight away from here, I could approve or as well as, instant pay to some of these. So here's an example of how do you bring, automation, visualization, impact, and shape into real life scenario. So that was an example that we used. Now, this is where we define how do we move the function of finance from a traditional model to a dynamic business model. And that becomes the role of the new CFO. And the guest before this talked about leadership, talked about focus, talked about structure, talked about influence. Now, as we do this, at Oracle, we are not doing this alone. We're doing with a large community of customers that we work with. Some of the names that you might want to know is like Facebook, Dropbox, Pandora, as well as Carbon, and some of the largest financial institutions in the world. In India, we do that with ICICI Bank. We do with Persistent System. We do with Safe Express. Right? So these are customers that we work with, and we are bringing these kind of things which was not possible in the past at speed and at scale. Of course, we've got capabilities across the board, right from finance to procurement, and that's what I've showed you here. You could start your journey from anywhere, and you don't need to necessarily start like ripping off and replacing stuff.
Thank you.